Genesis, the very first book in our Bibles, and that placement is fitting because the word Genesis comes from the Greek word that means something like beginnings or origins. The book of Genesis really is the beginning of everything. We see the story of the whole world and how all of creation came into being, and more importantly, the one that brought it into being. We also see in it the story of humanity and how humans came into existence and how God made them in His own image and likeness, and then how quickly we rebelled against the one that made us. And then maybe most importantly, we see the beginning of salvation history. We see how things went wrong and what this God did to begin to make them right. And so this book is incredible. It is a very long book. It's 50 chapters. And the pace starts out really big and quick and fast and then slows down to a crawl at times. It begins with maybe the most famous line in the Bible, "In the beginning, God," and it ends with, "And Joseph died being 110 years old." And so what happens between these two phrases in these 50 chapters? As I said, the book is 50 chapters. It has two main sections that you can kind of get in your mind. One section, section 1 would be chapters 1 through 11. And this is the story of God, the world, and humanity. We see God making all things from nothing: the heavens, the earth, sun, moon, continents, stars, animals, sea creatures, all of it. And the height of His creation is man. He makes both male and female in His image, blesses them, tells them to be fruitful, multiply. From here, things are good and right and in perfect harmony. Then comes the fall. Humans rebel and sin enters the world and fractures and stains everything. If sin were a color like green, the whole world would be tinged with green. And so from here we see humans increase in their corruption, and so God sends a flood on the earth, one of the greatest acts of judgment in the entire Bible. But even after this, humans keep on sinning, keep on rejecting this God. They build a tower that reaches to heaven to make their own name great. God has to come down and stop their plans and confuse their language. So that's section 1. The main characters are God, obviously, Adam, Eve, Cain, Abel, Noah. That's chapters 1 through 11. Section 2 is chapters 12 through 50. Here the camera zooms in, slows down a bit, and we focus on one family, and it begins with one of the greatest acts of salvation in history, the calling of Abraham. And the rest of Genesis, and you might even argue the rest of the Bible, is about this family and his descendants and the promise God made to them, which would be He'd bless the entire world through Abraham's offspring. So God calls Abraham, makes a covenant with him, tells him to go, sends him out. The narrative slows down and we learn his story and all the ways that God worked in his life and how He gave him this promised son, Isaac. Then we learn of Isaac's son, Jacob, and then eventually Jacob's son, Joseph, who's in Egypt ruling. He eventually dies, and that sets up the next book of the Bible, which is the book of Exodus. Now, some key themes. What are some of the key themes in the book of Genesis? One would be God's sovereignty. God brought the world into existence from nothing. He needed no help doing this, asked no one permission for this. It was nothing but His own purpose and plan and wisdom and power doing this. He is the sovereign God that rules over all things. We see Him choosing Abraham, not his brother Nahor. We see Him choosing Isaac, not Ishmael, Jacob, not Esau. He decides who He will use, and one of the lines I love in the book is chapter 50, verse 20, where Joseph says to his brothers, "What you meant for evil, God meant for good." The very act that they meant for evil, God meant that act to be good. Second is God's judgment. God judges Adam, Eve, the serpent. He judges the whole world eventually with the flood, judges at Babel, rains down fire and brimstone on Sodom and Gomorrah. He has to act against evil and injustice and sin, and when it occurs, eventually God has to move and bring His judgment. But then third, there's God's mercy. He judges, but He shows mercy. He covers Adam and Eve in animal skin. Noah finds favor in His eyes. He calls Abraham and promises to bless and save the world through him. And in chapter 3, we see the first ever gospel promise. It's when God says to the serpent that the woman's offspring would crush his head. Theologians call this the proto-gospel, the first gospel. There is one coming, Eve's offspring, who eventually would make all things right. Then there's faith. That's the fourth theme. In faith, we trust what God has said. We trust what God wants us to do. Abraham believed God, and it was credited to him as righteousness. That's the theme of Genesis. Whatever God says, we do it. We act in faith, and we trust Him. This is a great book, and there's way more to say about the book of Genesis. So let me encourage you and let me challenge you to read it, and to read it in one, maybe two sittings. It will take you a while to do this, but I promise you it will be such a blessing and such a grace to you.